There is a letter from the Rebbe to Rav Zevin, printed in Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chavdalet, page 561, and also in Igros Kodesh, Chelik Yudalev, page Reish Samach Tes. There the Rebbe writes ha'ores on his Sefer Sipurei Chassidim. Rav Zevin was a big Gaon. He was a Chassid of the Rebbe, and he wrote many Svarim, but he also gave out 2 Svarim called Sipurei Chassidim. One is on Torah, one is on Meyadim HaYomim Tovim. And the one on Torah goes according to some certain psukim, and brings certain stories of tzaddikim, of chassidim, that fit to different psukim. So the Rebbe writes to him, first, generally speaking, that you have to be very careful in these stories. You have to know where the stories come from. They should have makeres, etc., etc. But then he writes to him, behemshich to that there are certain stories of chassidim which make people wonder. And because of the wonder, they seem strange. Some people who read the stories or hear the stories say probably the one that's in the story, the person that the story is about, probably did against the din, or certainly not lifnim mishuras adin. And b'meila, that makes people look at Chassidus and the Rabbeim of Chassidus, that it's not correct. At the same time, had you made one little small change in even an expression, then the whole kasha goes off. And the Rebbe writes that since most of these stories went through many stages, one person heard it and then he told another. So probably the bituyim, the expressions are not exact. And b'meila, especially if you change the language, and therefore certain things come out. And the Rebbe gave him 2 examples. I'm going to mention one example. The second example he brings is there's a story, he says, Sipur Shin Yud Gimel, concerning Zushe of Anipoli. There was a person that after his father passed away, he came to him in his cholim a few times that he should shmadzach Rachmana litzlan. And he couldn't understand, why is this happening? So he went to Reb Zushe, and Reb Zushe told him, the way it says in the story, he should dig the kever up and look what's there. And they dug it up and they found something which is like a tzelem inside. And they took it out and then it stopped. So it sounded like a big meifes of Reb Zushe. This meifes, the story got to the Vilner Gaon, and the Vilner Gaon said, by him it's not a meifes, it's a clear Yerushalmi. It says this in Yerushalmi. His pele is, how did Reb Zushe know the Yerushalmi when he says Chassidim know how to learn? When this got to Reb Zushe, the word of the Vilner Gaon back to Reb Zushe, Reb Zushe said, it's true, I didn't know the Yerushalmi, but I took it from where the Yerushalmi took it. So the Rebbe writes to him, to Rav Zevin, that this story seemed not to fit to halacha, because you're not allowed to dig up a kever. But with one little change, the Rebbe writes, if it's not exactly the way it said that you should dig the kever, but he said dig around the kever, or in Daladamas around the kever, then the whole kasha goes off. And for sure, that the hishtalshel is when the story came from one person to another, they weren't so medayik, and came out that it's the kever itself, and that's how a person will read it. And then the Rebbe writes to him, Derech Haga, by the way, you bring in the story that's a clear Yerushalmi, do you by any chance know where it says in Yerushalmi? In other words, the Rebbe knew all the Yerushalmi and he knew it's not there, but he didn't want to write, I assume, that it's not in Yerushalmi, as if saying, I know Yerushalmi. So he wrote him as a question. And he wrote it separately, not in the letter, because in the letter would mean that this is a raya, this story is not true. And it's only based if the Rebbe admits that he knows all of Yerushalmi. So he didn't bother, but negate the story itself, he just wrote that point. And then he says to him also, do you by any chance know what Yerushalmi is? But I want to mention that Reb Ben Shekorf, who's a mashgiach in yeshiva here in Miami, showed me something very interesting. That there's a sefer called Shivchei Tzadikim, which was printed in Tov Reish Mem Gimel. And there you have this story. This story was also printed in a sefer in years later, which is called B'tzine Kadisha. And there the story is actually the way it's written by Rav Zevin. By stories, it seems like Rav Zevin took it from there. But in the sefer Shivchei Tzadikim, which was written many years before that, there the same story is told. And then there the lashon in the story is like this, that Zushe answered him, Sheyachteru v'yachparu heitev soviv kivrei shaloviv anifter. They should dig very good around the kever of the father who died, ad hadef shalei soviv, till the wall that's around the kever, and to see if there's nothing there, which is a symbol of Avodah Zarah or something like that. So here we see that the original one actually said to dig soviv kever. So the Rebbe, when the Rebbe said that this probably was a mistake, we see here clearly that in the original source of the story, Etake said the way the Rebbe says it should be, that it was around the kever.